I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, your home for deer hunting news, stories, and strategies. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kenyon. This is episode number 147. Today on the show, we're joined by Eric Pysar, an electrician and avid deer hunter from New York, who's taking the idea of a rutcation to a whole new level. And in this episode, we learn how Eric consistently pulls off multiple Pope and Young bow kills on his annual DIY rut hunting trips. All right, welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, brought to you by Sitka Gear. And today, we're without my co-host Dan again, as he's unfortunately under the weather, but here's hoping to a speedy recovery. I'm not alone, though. Joining me here shortly is a man by the name of Eric Pysar. And I discovered Eric last year, actually while working on an article for Outdoor Life that I was calling Crazy for the Rut. And the basis of that story was that I was going to find and profile a number of different DIY hunters who go above and beyond what normal people do during the rut. You know, these are guys, I was hoping to find guys that were just super hardcore about hunting the rut, and that have extreme levels of success doing it in their own unique way. So as I started combing my personal network and the interweb and all that kind of good stuff, I came across this electrician from New York named Eric. And word had it that Eric was taking these kind of crazy extended trips out to the Midwest every fall and killing great bucks every year, and then like a bunch of great bucks every year. So I got Eric on the phone and I started talking to him, and lo and behold, it was all true. This guy was heading out to states like South Dakota, Nebraska, Iowa, Illinois, and some others, and he was coming home with 2 or 3 or 4 different bucks per trip, and these were big mature bucks too. And he was doing all of this without owning any land out there, without using an outfitter, without having a lease. He was just going to public land spots and different little pieces he got permission on. And, you know, the more I heard, the more impressed I was. And Eric's story ended up making it into that article in Outdoor Life. And ever since those initial conversations, I've wanted to get him on the podcast to dive more deeply into that stuff and to share what he's doing with all of you. So finally, today, I'm able to do that, and I'm pretty pumped about it. And I think Eric is just a perfect example of a normal guy, just like a lot of you guys and like me, who's just tore up with whitetails and who's decided to work hard all year round and sacrifice a lot of other things in order to be able to chase that whitetail passion that he has during the fall. And I think what he has to share will be able to help a lot of you guys and girls out there who might want to try something similar in the future. So no matter what, I think if you hunt managed ground or public land, the Midwest or the South or somewhere in between, I think you're all going to be able to learn something today from Eric's matter-of-fact, no bullshit approach to hunting mature bucks. So with all that said, I want to kick things off briefly here with our Sitka story, and then we'll get Eric on the line. So our Sitka story today comes from a guy named Mike Massey, who grew up hunting and chasing whitetails in Florida, which I think, as many of you know, is not exactly a big whitetail mecca. But when Mike finally headed up towards the Midwest, he found out that whitetails and hunting up there is just a little bit different than back home.
And I looked up on top of this, on top of the draw on this ridge, and I could almost, it was just getting that time where, you know, it's just some silhouetted stuff. I really couldn't tell. I'm looking through some trees, and this deer, this mature buck, comes up and snort wheezes, and it made the hair stand up on all of my body. I mean, it was like, wow, okay. And that was probably that moment where I'm like, this is what it's about. And I remember my blood was just pumping. You grow up watching these TV shows, and you never get to experience that down in Florida. I've been hunting pretty much my whole life, and I was never able to. But literally, the first couple of hunts that I hunted out of state during prime time, and with this case, it wasn't even prime time. I mean, a deer snort wheezing in September is a little funny. And here I am, coming up as a young guy in South Florida, never really get to experience that stuff. I'm grunting at this deer, and I'm snort wheezing at a deer in September, and I'm thinking, you don't read that stuff. You were taught. You watch the Old Timers and Tom Wren and Steve Potts on the Stan Potts on TV, and they're not snort wheezing in September. Well, I didn't. I went, and what the heck? And sure enough, I got a reaction like I never thought possible, because it was like, oh, this is how it's supposed to be. So the real deal.
That's awesome.
The real deal.
Mike Massey is a Sitka Whitetail Ambassador, and this was a Sitka story. And if you'd like to someday make a Sitka story of your own, visit sitkagear.com. And now let's get back to the show and get Eric Pysar on the line. All right, with us now on the line is Eric Pysar. How are you doing, Eric?
Good. How are you doing, Mark?
I'm well. Like we were just talking about a few minutes ago before I started recording. I had such a good time chatting with you last year when I worked on this article about you that for a while now I've wanted to try to get you on the podcast to kind of dig in deeper. So I'm really glad we can do this. So thank you for taking the time to do this, Eric.
Yeah, no problem. I like talking about deer hunting, so it should be fun.
Yeah, ditto. So I'm curious, Eric. When we talked last time, I was really asking a lot of questions about how you hunt the rut today, what you're doing these days. But what I never did get to hear from you was how you got into this. How did you get so into hunting? When did that all start, Eric?
Well, started probably when I was maybe 12 or so. I got into archery, just shooting around the yard. This is, back a long time ago, and I luckily had a neighbor that, really liked to hunt. So I would spend a lot of time down there. No one in my family hunts at all, not a single person. So it's just kind of weird that I got into it, but that's how I started. I started out just shooting those red fair recurve bows around my yard. And back then, they had archery in school. So I remember getting on the bus with a bow and arrows. And
that's awesome.
Actually shooting in school. I don't know if they do that anymore, but probably not.
I wish my school had that. So you started shooting the bow then. When did you end up killing your first deer?
Well, that took a long time, actually, from the time I started hunting. When I started hunting, I didn't have much equipment. There wasn't any hunting shows on TV. Didn't have a computer or anything like that, So basically I was getting, psyched up for my neighbor who hunted a lot. But yeah, I just had, my first bow was a big, long whitetail, Bavaria whitetail. Big, long thing with, I don't know, had 4 or 6 wheels on it. Big, giant thing. I remember the day I got it. I remember how much it cost. It was $55 from Cabela's. And it was just, that's how I started. I didn't get a deer for a long time, and I would have been happy with any deer, anything. And that didn't happen too quickly. I was actually, I think I was hunting for maybe 3 years before I even knew there was a bow sight for a bow. That's how pathetic I was, really. Pretty bad. I remember my first year of actually hunting, I missed at least 15 shots at deer.
Oh no, that is tough.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was bad. I was bad. I was horrible.
So what I forgot to ask was this all happening in New York, or where was this when you were growing up and learning to hunt?
Yeah, right in New York, upstate New York. About even with the middle of the state on the Massachusetts side. I live right near the Massachusetts border here.
Okay. So it's probably not an area that is just overrun with deer either, right? Is it kind of a relatively tough place compared to maybe some of the Midwestern states that a lot of people hunt?
Back then it was a lot different. There was tons and tons of deer around my area, just not a real lot of big ones, just lots of them, but I don't remember, well, maybe it's because I just didn't know how to get to them, but I don't remember any big bucks at all back then. And, I'd see them in the fields and, there was a lot of farm country I could drive around. Not then, this is before I had a license, but, there was a lot of deer back then. Since, up to this modern time, there's a lot less. They just have them, killed right back. They're just keeping them a lot lower population of them these days.
So you struggled those early years. When did the switch flip for you? When you went from this struggling hunter to all of a sudden a very successful hunter? Was that, was this something that happened, once you killed that first deer, then it just clicked and you were going with it? Or is this something a little more recent?
It was years and years before I got anything great. So it took me a long time just to get one deer. And my first deer with a bow was a button buck. That's it. And I was real happy about it. real happy, So I finally got one. It was just great. And after that, it seemed like I would get a deer once in a while, but it was always, always a small buck or a doe. And that went on for a long time. I was like 14 when I first got my first license to bow hunt. And geez, I didn't kill anything that great until maybe 2000, after the year 2000. But prior to the year 2000, I just didn't kill anything big, but I always got, I got to the point where I always could get my deer. And then I wanted to try something better, or, try something, I wanted to just, really all I wanted to do was get a 10-pointer. That was my first goal, just to get a 10-pointer. So that took a while.
That's pretty awesome. Do you remember that first 10-pointer?
Yeah, I do remember the first 10-pointer because it wasn't in New York where I lived. By the time I was kind of thought I was okay at getting a deer, any deer. That's when hunting shows started to come on once in a while. And this is still before I had a computer. So I started to learn that there was bigger deer and better places to hunt probably than where I was hunting. So, after a long time of being really happy doing what I was doing, but then I decided I just wanted to take a trip. And the first trip I took was actually to Saskatchewan to go on an outfitted deer hunt. That was in 2001. And I went there and went to a real remote place. It was just awesome. I loved it. And way back in the who knows where I was, way north in Saskatchewan. I finally got my first 10-pointer with a rifle. I didn't go bow hunting that year.
Wow.
On rifle hunt.
Was it one of those big chocolate horn, beautiful bucks like you see up in Canada?
Yeah, it was, probably 150-inch deer. Just a big, 2-foot spread on it.
Jeez.
Big, 24-inch main beams. Just a big giant deer that might have been almost going downhill. I don't know. He's I didn't know anything about aging deer, but I had the feeling this one was an old deer just looking at him.
Yeah. So since that point, as I know now from talking to you in the past, now I know that you go on these big hunting trips every year, but lots of times you're going, you're doing it all yourself, and you're hunting some private, some public, and you're hitting multiple states. Did that start right after that first hunt? You went out there, you killed your 10-pointer, and then after that, did you start doing these trips every year, or when did you start doing that?
Well, I went to Saskatchewan. It was awesome. So I actually went there 2 more years. And it's kind of expensive, and up in Saskatchewan, you have to use an outfitter. I was kind of new to the game of traveling around to go deer hunting. But yeah, I did good the second year. I actually got a 194-inch 17-pointer the next year up there.
Wow.
Then the third year I went up there, I wanted to bow hunt. So I did. I didn't use a gun. And it wasn't the greatest thing in the world, but I did wind up getting a okay buck. It was an 11-pointer, not the biggest thing, but at least I got it with a bow. I was pretty happy about that. So after that, I just can't really afford to go to Canada every year as much as I liked it. And I decided that I would start going to the United States, just places I had heard about, and try. So that's how I started. After I went to Canada, I just decided that I didn't want to really, outfitters are okay, but I was more leaning towards like, well, what can I do, just on my own,
For sure.
So that's how my thinking kind of went.
Yeah.
And so, I hunted I hunted quite a little bit around the Northeast, but then right around that time, it must have been 2005 actually was the first year that I went to the Midwest. And I actually drew, this is the craziest thing, is I drew a Zone 5 Iowa tag with one preference point.
Jeez.
Which doesn't happen anymore these days. But so yeah, that was like one of the first places I went. And Illinois was everyone wanted to go to Illinois. And I guess people still do. I don't think it's the best place anymore, but
so coming from New York.
It's still good.
Yeah, so coming from New York, when you first started hunting the Midwest on these trips of yours, what was that like? Was it as big of a difference as you were expecting? Was it as good as you thought it might be based on TV and different things like that first couple of years?
Oh yeah, it was way better than even what I thought, because I could take everything that I learned here and go out there where there was, just actual deer that were big and nice, and it was I don't want to say it, it's going to make people mad, but it was actually a lot easier to hunt in the Midwest than in the Northeast.
Yeah.
A lot easier. And mainly I'm thinking just because, maybe, I don't even know what the percentage is, but a lot of the land is just fields. So, that takes out a whole bunch of land you don't have to walk around. And it just makes it easier to predict what they're going to do. And they're actually there to be had, they were out there. So
yeah, that makes a big difference. You can't kill a big one if they're not there.
Yeah, you have to be in the spot where they exist.
Yeah. So
So
since then, Eric, you've been going out. Well, I guess first I'm curious to hear what all these different states have you hunted now. You mentioned Illinois and Iowa, but where else have you gone and hunted now in these different areas for your trips?
Oh, well, in the Northeast, New York, of course, and then I've hunted in Maine, which is a real tough one. Hunted in Massachusetts, which is right next door here, so I can do that all the time. But out in the Midwest and the Plain States, I've gone to Ohio, Illinois, Iowa, Nebraska, South Dakota are the places I've been.
Okay. And now that you've been doing this for a while, I already know the answer to this, but for those listening, what kind of success have you started having now that you've done these trips? Tell me about these trips. They're pretty long trips, and you're usually doing pretty darn well. Can you kind of give us a high-level overview of how these usually end up going now?
Yeah, I remember in 2008, I started hunting Nebraska and South Dakota at the same time, and it was awesome. I was on my own, doing my own things, looking at whatever land I could get on, looking at all kinds of different public land. But yeah, and that first year, 2008, I wound up getting I wound up getting a nice deer in South Dakota and a nice deer in Nebraska. And 2009, I didn't do as well in Nebraska and South Dakota, but I went to Ohio after that and got a nice deer. And then 2010, I shot, I forget where I was. I think I was mostly in Nebraska, and you could get two tags in Nebraska. Plus, there was an Indian reservation I was hunting on, and South Dakota. So, I think in 2010 and 2011, I wound up getting. 2010, I actually went to Iowa as well. So I wound up getting 4, Pope and Young sized bucks between Iowa, South Dakota, and Nebraska. So that was a three state hunt again. 2009 was a 3-state hunt as well. 2011, it was a 2-state hunt, but I was able to get 3 tags in Nebraska because one was a reservation tag, and at that time Nebraska had a two buck limit, and then South Dakota had a tag too. So yeah, it's been pretty good on the good years.
Yeah,
pretty good.
So, and that kind of thing continued on from 2011. I mean, I remember you mentioned some of those hunts, 2012, 13, 14, 15. You continued to fill 3 or 4 tags with really nice bucks in almost all those years, right?
Yeah. 2011 was like a really good year. 2012, that's the year that EHD hit my area that I hunt really bad. Really, really bad. I did get a couple bucks that year, but not quite, there weren't as many, less to choose from. So ever since 2012, it hasn't quite been the same out in that area. But I have done well every year. I mean, it doesn't kill everything.
Right.
It makes it a little bit harder.
So how long are these trips? You're going out here hitting multiple states, and you're coming all the way from New York. How much time are you spending out here every year, and what time of year is it that you're doing these trips?
Well, it's always pretty much the same thing. Whatever state I'm going to wind up with, I check out their gun season, and I schedule my trip for the day to last until the day before gun season ends. So I count back 3 weeks from when gun season starts. And that usually is the first 2 weeks in November and the last week of October. and that's just about the time frame every single time. There aren't too many states, I don't think, that have a gun season prior to the second week in November. Most of them, you get at least 2 weeks of bow hunting in November.
Yeah. How do you manage to do that? How are you able to spend so much time out there?
I just have to work the whole rest of the year, and I have a nice boss, and I just have to. It's always been a thing with me, and that I'm just not going to be around. You know, it doesn't matter. Whatever's happening doesn't really matter because I'm going deer hunting pretty much. It's really the bottom line. and it's been that way my whole life. I mean, even when I hunted around here, even when I was learning how to hunt, I mean, there were seasons I hunted every single day of bow season, which in New York back then was a month. So I had a few years of that, but yeah, I just like that time period, and I don't think that's too much to ask to have 3 or 4 weeks to yourself.
Yeah. So yeah. I gotta believe that to be able to do that, you know, like you said, you've got to work all the rest of the year. You've got to probably sacrifice some other things. You probably don't get to go on many other vacations. Maybe you probably have to save up some money. But, you know, would you say that's fair? Like, could more people do some trips like this to some degree if they chose to sacrifice some other things, like maybe you have?
Yeah, definitely. Because you know, I'm not rich. I'm an electrician. In New York, you know, it's a good job, but it's not going to make me millions. You know, so I would say, yeah, you're exactly right. I do have to, you know, I'm a big fisherman too. I love fishing, and I had to pretty much cut out my summer fishing trips to be able to just say I'm going to be gone for hunting. You know, the job is, they're good, and they've been good to me, but one more summertime trip is probably going to break their backs if I just, you know. So, you know, as it was last year, I was planning on going hunting, and then I got drawn for a Maine moose tag, so I had to squeeze that into the middle of my work schedule. That was tough.
Yeah, I bet. A 3 week trip, when you're going out here on this rut hunting trip, what is that like? I don't think many guys or girls hunt like you do for 3 weeks straight. And from what I know, you're hunting every one of those days, right? I mean, tell me about what that's just like as an experience. Is that exhausting? Is it fun the whole time? Is it tough? Is it, I don't know, what's that like for people?
It's fun the whole time, and it's the way it works. It's just, it wouldn't work. And if I did a 1 week vacation, it just wouldn't work the same. It just, you have to be there to, well, I'm a rut hunter. I love the rut. I think that's just the best time to cash in, and it's when you're going to see the most activity. So for those 3 weeks, it's really awesome. What happens is I get there, and of course, I can't scout prior to getting there. I can't take a 21-hour drive just to scout somewhere in the summer or take the time off or whatever. So when I get there, that's the first thing I have to do is I have to scout, check it out. The good thing is I've been going to the same places sometimes. I mix it up, but I go to the same places also. And, you know, that's really what you got to do is build up, you know, just go there once. Go there twice, you're going to be twice as good, and you go there the third time, you're going to really know what's going on there. Once is tough, but you could do it. You could really just do it. You just got to sacrifice the first little bit. You might have to drive around a little bit. You might have to, you know, explore. You might have to, you know, you should have a list prepared of all the places you want to go. So you could just boom, 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 hit them all, get as many in as you can. And really not the greatest hunting time in the last week of October. So it's a good time to kind of just check things out. But by the first week in November, or Halloween even, you kind of want to have a couple spots ready, for sure, because that's when things are going to start heating up. And that's when they're going to start to move. So I like to have a few places ready where I know I can go. And then, hunt as much as you can. And if it's not productive hunting, and you feel, you're not really doing anything, then go look for another place and keep kind of doing that as much as you can, and the key to the whole thing is, and I've seen it happen to people before, they go on a hunt for a week and you get 6 straight days of south wind and the deer just don't move. It's too hot for them to move, so they can't. And then all of a sudden, poof, it gets cold, and then boom, you start, it's just like a light switch. So somewhere, I would say in that 3-week period, you're going to get 3 or 4 killer days. That's just unbelievable. But you can't predict what those days are going to be. Really. You just have to be there. So that's how, and a lot of these trips, I'll go for 3 weeks, and I've killed 3 bucks in like 3 back-to-back days.
Wow.
Because all of a sudden it's nothing. And then boom, you get one. And then you move to the next state or the next tag, and boom, you get another one, right away. And that happens quite a bit.
What are those conditions that typically spark it for you out there?
It's just cold. Anything that gets cold, those are the best for me. And really, a lot of people love talking about the moon. The moon doesn't really affect me at all because I'm there to hunt. Those, whether it is 3 weeks or whatever it is, I'm going to hunt every day anyway. So the moon doesn't really play into it for me. But the weather does. And it's just about always some kind of cold weather that's starting things up.
Yeah. You mentioned early on that when you start these trips, that you sometimes, especially if it's a new property, you're sacrificing the first day or maybe 2 to scout. And you mentioned maybe even still trying to get permission on a place. But let's say you've got permission on a place, or you've picked out a piece of public land. What does that first day, like, what specifically are you doing? How are you scouting? What are you looking for? Like, I'm curious about the details. What exactly, how far do you go into these places? How do you learn a spot quickly?
Yeah, it depends how big it is. Some places you just can't cover them in a day. Other places you can walk the whole thing in half a day. So what I like to do, what I really like, if I know the area and I've been there before, it's a lot easier. But I do like to just take one walk through where I think the deer are going to be, and just, a lot of times in the Midwest there's woods and then there's fields, so I'll walk the woods or the edge of the woods in a field or something, and I just want to walk it once. Meanwhile, I'm mentally evaluating everything I see and thinking about possible places. And usually if I'm like, I don't, looks good, but, maybe not, I just keep going, and I try to get at least one place where I'm like, oh man, you just look at it and you're like, I know I could kill a buck here. I know it. And so hopefully, depending on what the access is, hopefully you could just maybe walk through once and then access, through a field right to the point you want to be in the woods. So you're not walking back and forth all the time. But one walk through during a rut hunt, it doesn't mess up the deer too bad. Still able to get them.
Yeah.
You know?
What are these killer spots look like? You mentioned you find these spots where you're just like, oh, I can kill one here. What kind of things are you looking for that tell you that?
I like rivers. Rivers are always in the Midwest. People want to farm. You know, it's mostly farmers, and farmers want fields. They don't really want woods. But wherever there's water, rivers, even small ones, they have to leave some trees. You know, like a small creek and a ravine, you know, they have to leave some trees for erosion. So it just seems like any kind of river, and big rivers, they're awesome too. The bigger the river, the more trees are on the sides of them. And, you know, that's where the deer are going to be. And, you know, the rivers, you know, they've collected all the best soil that's washed off all the land. So there's just good minerals, good cover. Usually a good place to be. But there's, you know, lots of other things to look for too. But so I'll get in a spot maybe with a river and just walk it until, you know, by the time I'm out walking around, you should be seeing scrapes and rubs. You know, maybe the area torn up where, you know, bucks have fought, or just tons and tons of tracks, you know, just any kind of heavy, more than normal sign is just kind of what I'm looking for. All the typical stuff, rubs, scrapes, you know, anything that's just going to kind of tell you that deer are using it, and they're using it a lot, you know?
Yeah.
It just seems like every place I get to, there'll be one spot where I can't explain it. I'll just look around and you just look at the terrain and you look at the sign, and you just kind of know that sooner or later there's going to be a buck cruising through.
Yeah. So that rutting sign, the scrapes, rubs, that kind of stuff, it sounds like that you're just looking at that as a general sign of there being a lot of deer activity. Or are you actually saying, okay, there's a rub line here, so I want to set up along a rub line, or because I see this scrape here, I'm going to hunt this specific spot? I mean, how do you factor that specific sign into how you're going to hunt?
Well, a lot of it, you just got to kind of know that, you know, everything that you've built your whole life figuring out about deer. You just have to kind of apply that, and you have to say, well, you know, deer is most apt to, you know, come through this hourglass pinch point rather than expose himself on a prairie, or, you know, eventually, you know, too many things cross in one spot. You know, you just kind of get a feeling, you know, and after years and years and years of hunting, you kind of can figure that out. I mean, it just seems to come natural to me, maybe. But it's just something where maybe someone else would walk right through where I thought was phenomenal and now want to hunt there. I've had it go both ways. Some of my friends are awesome hunters, and sometimes they pick a spot, and I'm like, why are they doing that? And they must have just had that good feeling or something. But
right.
Yeah, a lot of it's just instinct and feeling. And
I'm curious, if you were to think back on some of your past seasons, is there any particular place you can specifically remember that you ended up, you know, having this feeling and it ended up being a spot you killed a deer? Do you remember a specific place like that you could describe, just so we can, you know, kind of see this particular instance that did pan out, and we can kind of better understand why you were successful there?
Yeah, let's see. There was a really good spot on public land in South Dakota, and just it was pretty darn hard to get to it. You had to go down a ravine into some thick cedars, and you'd be poking your eyes out. and it was just the nastiest thing. And I went to that public land 3 times before I figured out how to even get into it. And then once I figured out how to get in, I just went down in and got past the nastiest stuff you could imagine. And then, it just opened up into this oasis. And it was just, I was out of the cedars. And then all of a sudden there was a dry creek bed. And it was just right up the side of the public land. And it just created the perfect little valley funnel. It just was like awesome. And then, you could just see where the deer were coming off the hill. There's a couple trails, but they all kind of crossed up in this spot, and you could see a distinct scrape line, and I just knew deer were traveling it. I went a little further up, and sometimes I don't like to do that. Once I find a good spot, I like to just stop right there and hunt. But sometimes your curiosity gets you in first time. But this time was my first time in there, and I went a little further up, and I found the ground just shredded right up. And I looked, and there was a pine laying on the ground. It busted right off. People see deer with bust tracks all the time. I found where one pine busted off, and I'm like, wow, pretty good sized pine. I'm like, whatever there was fighting was big, probably. And it just had all the signs of big deer, lots of activity. You could tell, one deer doesn't make one rub, and one deer doesn't make one scrape. If they're good, if it's a good spot, multiple deer always hit the same rubs, hit the same scrapes. It's not one deer scrape. Sometimes it is, or one deer's rub. A lot of times if it's a good spot, many bucks will come, scrape on the same scrapes, rub on the same rubbed already trees, So that one spot I found, I just knew it was going to be awesome. And I went there, and actually it was a public land spot, and I had a standoff with a deer, and I wound up killing it. It just was one of them things where, and it was just at the very beginning of the day. And that deer, it was a nice deer, and I was like, maybe not. Maybe I shouldn't have shot that deer. So I was hunting with a friend of mine, and I said, hey, you got to go back down in that spot where I just killed a deer there, but I just knew there was something way bigger and better in there. Anyway, he went in there the next day and just killed a monster slammer.
Wow.
Giant wide buck. So I got the booby prize that day, but my friend got a real nice giant.
Wow.
So,
how did you? Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that there's lots of spots like that. I have good feelings on, and they wound up being good.
So I was curious, how did you end up setting up in there? What specific spot did you end up hanging a stand? Was it right over where you saw that sign from the fight, or was it back farther where you originally saw the good sign? And what things were you thinking about when setting up your hunt or your tree stand to hunt it the next day, or was it that day you ended up hunting?
It was I found the spot and started hunting it right away, but it was one of those places where the woods was just a finger, and one side of it was a river, and one side of it was a big giant prairie, actually private land on the prairie, and it was just the only, it was the only good strip of trees. And then out of that, the trees were the good spot, but out of that there was a big steep bluff and a plate, just kind of an area that didn't seem the best for travel. But then there was an area that was that dry, flat riverbed that just had green grass growing in it. And you could just tell that every deer came off the hill, maybe not off on the same trail, but every one passed down that valley, hit the scrapes that were down through it, it just pinched right off almost got, it was so sparse there was almost nothing, and then it opened up into that cedar thing that I had to crawl in to get there. So it was just a natural pinched down area, and I just went to pretty much the last scrape before the thing kind of petered out, and just hunted right on the end. It was real easy. And that was another place that I could get to by a boat, I later figured out. Sometimes it takes a while to figure it all out. That was an example of where I walked in and then found a better way to boat in later. But,
I'm curious about your stand situation. When you're going in there, early in the hunt, and you're doing your walk and scouting, do you end up hanging a bunch of different tree stands over the course of those first couple of days and then hunt them over the next week or two or whatever? Or do you just have one set that you're, hunting mobily with? Like you've got a tree stand sticks on your back, and then you find sign, you hunt right then, and then you tear down and move on to the next place. What are you doing there?
I have the biggest collection of junk stands you ever want to see. I got climbing sticks. I have, stands of all different types. I have just so much stuff I accumulate over the years, but I guess it kind of depends. Some places I don't mind. Like, some guys don't like, hunting a stand more than once. Some guys just want to be completely mobile, but I don't think it's really necessary with rut hunting as much. So I do have sets that I put in. And over the course of 3 weeks, I might hunt it once, twice, may never hunt it, depends. But I put a few out, and then I always have a bunch of mobile stuff. I have the light sticks. I do really like a comfortable stand, though. The stand isn't comfortable. You just can't stay there all day, and I like to stay there if I have to all day. But yeah, comfort. I like to be comfortable. Otherwise, you fidget too much. Why, in this day and age, why be uncomfortable when there's so many choices?
Yeah, fair enough. And to your point, especially in a situation like yours or anyone really, when you're going on a trip, maybe cross country, and you're going on that trip to hunt, I mean, you want to maximize your time as much as possible. And during the rut, that all-day sit can be important. So might as well do whatever you can to make sure it's possible, which, to your point, is making it more comfortable.
Yeah, I mean, I want to do everything that's possible. So I bring food, water, nice stand, hopefully a nice stand. If it's a nice enough spot, I can sit in a pretty harsh stand too.
if it's the right spot.
I've done that. Yeah. And sometimes I go in and I plan on, maybe doing a morning hunt, scouting my way out and doing something. But then a lot of times during the day, I change, and I'm not afraid to just stay hungry. Like, I might go in thinking I'm going to sit for 2 hours and sit all day. If I think it's that kind of day, I'll change my plan, and just mostly I change it and stay. Very seldom do I think of sitting all day and then want to leave early. That doesn't happen too many times. But
so what is it then that makes you decide you have to stay? Is that just you've just seen so much deer activity that you got to stay there, or is it some other kind of thing?
No, it's usually that, you see the deer, they're on their feet, they're moving. Maybe you just saw a crazy chase and that the bucks are still going to make another loop around, or just you see a deer every hour, or it comes time when you think you're going to leave and you're surrounded by deer, or just anything that usually involves seeing more deer than what you expected to see, or better activity, or a big giant buck chase, or something. I'm never usually sitting there. Oh, I didn't see anything, well, maybe I'll wait longer and longer. It usually doesn't happen like that. But or it could be the wind. Maybe maybe my second choice, I know the wind is bad, but the wind is good in my first choice. So I just say, well, I better stay here because it's not going to be happening in that other place I want to go because the wind's dead wrong. So.
Now, why did you say that the opposite doesn't happen? So you said you usually won't go to a spot to hunt all day and then decide to move. Why doesn't that happen very often for you?
Usually once I have it set in my head to go sit all day, there's a good reason that I want to do that to begin with. So I stick it out, and I just want to stay. I just, and even if I don't see a deer, if I'm set, I walked out the door saying I'm sitting here all day, I'll sit there all day. I usually don't want to quit. I don't want to leave. And that's a lot to do with everything. Never want to leave. I never want to give up. So I could stick it out. But yeah, I don't know why to me, just you plan to sit all day and you're going to leave early. That's kind of like just like quitting. So
it doesn't sound like you've got a whole lot of quit in you.
I don't like to. It's fishing or hunting. I want to maximize all the time.
I feel like of all the people I talk to that are really consistently successful hunters, that is just something you got to have. You can't quit when the going gets tough. You can't quit when it's, starts getting slow or cold or when you start getting tired. I mean,
yeah.
That's when you got to just batten down and stick it out.
Yeah, and there's going to be lots of bad times. Of all the time you're hunting, say I hunt for a month, there's going to be one day maybe where I get a deer. The rest of those days, was it great? Was it awesome sitting in that tree freezing all day? And there's a lot of bad days, tons of them. But you just forget about those and remember the good ones.
Yeah, it's all worth it for those few special moments, right?
Yeah, definitely. So, you just can't give up. You just gotta press on. You might be hungry, you might be cold, you might be uncomfortable, you might have a stick in your back, but just who cares? It's one day. If you can't handle one day, you're just not going to make it doing this kind of stuff.
Yeah. Speaking of that, what about just attitude? Like, how important is a positive attitude to the way you hunt? I feel when we talked last time, you'd mentioned this a little bit, and I think it kind of ties into what you just said. But I mean, how much does this mental side and the attitude side of things actually help you have the success that you've had?
You just gotta stay positive. Like, if you start thinking the worst, then that's what's going to happen. The worst. Every time I don't go to a spot going, oh, I'm not going to see anything anyway, I'll just go. I don't go. It's not like that. I think I'm going here, and any second now, a slammer's coming down the road. I just know it, And if I didn't feel like that every time I was hunting, it'd be terrible hunting. I wouldn't even have fun. Every time I go, I think something awesome is going to happen. And if I'm not there, I think I'm missing something. So, yeah, and a good attitude is pretty good. I've been in camps where, you get somebody that's a downer, and that can really drag everyone down.
Yeah.
Quick.
Yeah. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah. So, and, another, like, one of my biggest philosophies is you don't even have to do anything that great. If you could spend time in a good location, you're probably going to do pretty good. Just those two things, time and location. If you put in 3 weeks in a good location, I mean, something bound to be good is going to happen. You know, so it's just bound to happen. Something good will happen in that amount of time.
Yeah.
But you know, in a week, you know, you might just miss it by the weather that week. But
like
yeah,
like you said though, you know, even for a guy that only has a week, you have to go into that week with that positive attitude and willing to put in all the time, because yeah, you might miss it, but if you don't stick it out and try and give it everything you've got, you definitely will miss it. So whether you've got 1 week or 3, right, you got to go in there and give it every single little bit you have, right?
yeah, I would say so. I mean, I can remember a hunt. I actually won a hunt to Illinois. Actually was on the Hunting Beast website, and they had a good deer contest. It was really neat, and I wound up getting a trip to Illinois. But when I showed up there, it was I'm trying to remember what time of year it was. I think it was like prime rut time, and it was just 70 degrees every day. It was just hot. I mean, your face was frying in the stand. It was just, you know, it was pretty bad. And it was one of those south wind deals where it just blows and stays warm and just every day, south. And I sat every day, all day, and really ready through the heat, everything. And I was one of the few guys that walked out of there on the very last day. I wound up getting a nice buck. And it was just from sticking it out that much.
Yeah. A couple of years ago, I think it was 2015 maybe, we had a warm first week of November, and I was hunting in Iowa. I had a bunch of other friends that were hunting there too, and I ended up being stupid and bailing out for a day and a half to go deal with some other stuff. I thought, well, it's warm, I'm going to go deal with some family stuff. And I had 3 other friends that were still hunting, though, and even though it was like 70 degrees during the day, 3 days in a row, they each killed a nice mature buck on all 3 of those mornings. So I missed 2 of those days, and it was just a great reminder to me that even when the conditions aren't right, and even when, you know, everyone and all the signs point to it being a bad day, during the rut, anything can happen, and you do just need to stick it out, because, you know, it can still come together.
It can, you know, the deer aren't going to stop breeding, you know, and if it just takes that one, all it takes is one deer, one doe could turn everything around, and even in the worst of conditions.
Yeah.
I mean, even the worst times, you never know.
Yeah.
Never know.
All right, well, I think this is a good place for us to take a brief break for a word from our partners. And first, we have our weekly segment with Whitetail Properties. Here's our producer, Spencer Newharth.
This week with Whitetail Properties, we are joined by Jeff Probst, a land specialist out of northern Missouri. And Jeff is going to be telling us about what to look for when scouting a property in spring.
Well, I think for me, I've been doing a lot of spring scouting for a number of years, and I think the number one thing I look for is travel patterns and in the trails and through the timber, because everything's so open in the spring, and I can back trail these trails coming in and out of thickets and kind of parallel them to where they're field edges and to and from feeding sources and bedding sources. So I really like to walk the beat down trails, because that tells me where the deer are traveling, in the fall and throughout the year, where you can't see it as good when there's foliage on. So this time of year, early spring, there's no foliage on, and the sign is just laid out like a book. You can just read it so good. And then obviously I look for rubs and scrapes, and particularly rubs. I've got several farms that I hunt. I own a couple properties, and then I lease one. And I'm always looking at where the bucks are traveling because of the rubs, where the rubs are located. And it's pretty simple, actually. I just look for where the travel patterns are with the beat down trails. I look for rubs and old scrapes, and just everything's laid out so easy to see in the spring. It's my favorite time of year to scout.
If you'd like to learn more and to see the properties that Jeff currently has listed for sale, visit whitetailproperties.com/Propst. That's PROPST.
And finally, I wanted to share one more update from our friends at Huntera Maps, who earlier this spring launched their new Huntera mobile map, which allows you to get the uniquely high-quality map image that they have usually on their print maps now on your mobile device. And I actually got to use these mobile maps last fall, and during my Idaho elk hunting trip, this map came in particularly handy. It was the last day of our hunt, and we wanted to get up into this new area for the morning hunt and wanted to be there well before daylight. So we were up and hiking a couple hours before first light. And it wasn't like we had a trail or anything to follow. We were bushwhacking across country. So I used my mobile map on my phone to navigate to our destination. And it was super helpful for a couple of reasons. First off, I didn't need to have any kind of self-service, which is hard to get up there sometimes. And the map still tracked my position through GPS. Secondly, different than the maps you'll get from Google or other map apps, the Huntera mobile map has their unique Terra image, which brings together aerial imagery, 3D shading, and topo lines all together to make a map that allows you to see terrain features in incredible detail. So much more easily than with a normal aerial or topo map, I could see the ridgelines, I could see the saddles, I could see the hills that I needed to navigate towards to get to our destination. And I could do all this in the pitch dark just by looking at that map. It was hugely helpful. So with that said, to learn more or to customize and order your own Huntera mobile map, you can visit huntera.com. That's Huntera. And from now through April 20th, 2017, Wired to Hunt listeners can get 10% off their order and a free mobile map with every printed map order by using the code WIRED. That's WIRED. And again, that's 10% off your order and a free mobile map. Now, with that said, we will now get back to the show. You mentioned a second ago that that it all comes down to time and location, right? You got to put in enough time, and you got to be in one of these, key locations. I know something you mentioned in the past was that you like to look for places that other hunters don't go, especially when you're hunting public land, I'd imagine. How do you find these spots? What are some of the spots that you find other hunters don't go, and how do you get to these places or find these places in the first place?
Well, that's pretty much the thing that every hunter's trying to do, is go to a place where hunters don't go. You're not going to find too many places where nobody goes, you're not going to find any places where nobody's been. You might find a place where no one's going or no one's going at that time. My best hunting technique to get to places where there's going to be less people is my boat. And I take it on every trip, no matter what, no matter where I'm going, no matter if I think there's water there or not. I still take it because it's just a Zodiac boat. It rolls up into a duffel bag. It just unfolds. I blow it up. It's got 3 air chambers. It's got a hard wooden floor. Panels. You put it all together. It's like 9'6" long, but it'll take up to an 8 horsepower motor. So I bring a little outboard with me. And the boat, you literally fit it in a trunk if you had to, this whole setup. But the boat it's rated to carry over 1,000 pounds. So it's pretty stable. It's pretty quiet. It doesn't take a lot of water to float it. I use a motor, I don't have to. It has oars too. But it's one of the best ways to get away. And these places are rare, but they do exist, where you'll find, public land that the only way you can get to it is by water or permission from a private landowner. And most of the time, the private landowner isn't going to let you walk across their land to get easy access to the public you want to get to. So a boat can really do it. And you'll find places. I'm planning to hunt to Missouri this year, and I found already at least one place where it's only accessible by a boat. A lot of public land is just designed for people to use it, so there's a lot of trails and everything's opened up. But water seems to be a pretty consistent barrier. And you can get to some really neat places.
Yeah.
So that's finding places where other people don't go. I mean, it's hard. It's real hard. When you're bow hunting, it's a little bit better, because even if there is other people there, maybe you can just get away from them enough. You know, so it depends on the land. I mean, I hunt on land that's thousands of acres, and I've hunted on little 100-acre pieces. So I guess it all depends where you go. You know, it's hard to get away from people in just flat woods. People just walk and walk and walk and walk, and if they don't get wet, they'll keep walking and walking, you know.
Yeah. So do you, when you're actually, like, when you're planning a hunt, then even before you get out there, do you specifically look for public parcels or places you want to ask for permission that aren't like that? Are you specifically trying to find places on the map ahead of time online that, you know, look like they're going to have these pockets that are tough for people to find?
Yeah, I tried my best to do it online and cyber scouting to find places. Like I said, I'm planning a hunt in Missouri right now. So my list started out of places to go. The first thing I did was I picked out areas that only allow bow hunting. It was my first, you know, separator, I guess, of land. So, you know, I come up with a list like that, and then, you know, maybe they're not all the best, but that's where I started. And there's lots of places to look for land that a lot of people go online and hit the state land, and a lot of states have good interactive mapping. But there's other land that isn't state land that you could still publicly hunt on. I already mentioned the Indian reservations. Right, you know, I don't think they have the greatest reputation, but there's that's one piece of land. I've hunted on Army Corps of Engineers. They usually have land that you can hunt on in a lot of places. I think most of their land is around water, which goes hand in hand with the boat thing. I've hunted on power company land. It's not listed on the state land thing. So you just got to keep looking for all the different places that have public hunting. It's not just the state. There's other places that you can look. And then another thing I've had happen too, which is really cool, is a lot of states will have a walk-in program. Mm-hmm. I don't know how they work. I think they must give people a tax break for people to use their land for hunting. You've heard of that in different states.
Yep.
Well, once in a while, someone will enroll their land, but it won't make the publication of that year. So just before you do your trip, right after the public land atlas comes out for the year, most states have them, you call the office and say, well, what's been enrolled since the publication? And once in a while, you'll get lucky and you'll find a place that just went in to walk in, or whatever the case may be, and you'll get a first crack at it before it's well known. You know, that's a good. And that's happened a couple times. I went to Ohio once, and I went to American Electric and Power land that had just 7,000 acres that had just opened up the year before I got there.
Wow.
So it wasn't well known yet. And those can be pretty good it's rare, but if you're on top of it and you're doing your trip and you're planning, feel like making a call, it can't hurt.
Yeah, it's a great idea.
Yeah, like most of the people you talk to are super nice, super friendly. And I just wanted to mention one other thing about all these hunts I do. there's so many awesome people that have had so much to do with the deer that I've been able to get. And I hate people when I'm hunting in the woods, but outside of the woods, I relate people. And most of if you just happen to get friendly with, make some friends out there, and it happens almost every year if you're open to it. You could have some pretty cool things happen. Just a lot of the hunts, a lot of the cool stories that I've had and the successes have just been from really meeting some really nice people,
So is there anything you're doing, in particular that just allows you to have these opportunities? I mean, do you go to local diners and just chat people up or anything like that, that you're actively thinking about doing, or are these kind of things just happening by luck?
I think they happen by luck, but I have chatted in diners. Actually, one year it didn't pan out, but I met a guy in Illinois in a diner, just started talking about hunting, and next thing you know, he offered me up a piece of land that was going on.
Wow. And
I was like, wow. And it was great. It was on a river, on the Spoon River or something like that, but I just can't name. Oh, another just a good people story is I hope it isn't too long of a story, but
let's hear it.
A friend of mine got drawn for a moose tag in 2014 up in Maine. So another friend of mine that I hunt with every year, he had moose hunted in Maine already. He's like, oh, you got to go to this guy's camp. We were going to go moose. I was the sub permittee on this guy's permit, and we were going to just not use a guide. We're just going up do it yourself moose hunt. He's like, you got to go up to Gene's camp. So we did in 2014. I started talking to the guy who was kind of friends with my friend from back home already, and he was a little older than me, and he was, a big deer hunter, but he's way up in Maine, and they get some nice deer up there, but he was talking about Iowa a lot, and he was a really nice guy, and we were having a lot of fun up there, and I said, well, I told the guy, I have a really great farm in Iowa that I had gotten permission on, and I said, I'm pretty sure that you could get permission to hunt here, just tell me, talk to me, and whatever. So this guy from Maine, got his preference points, and I gave him the information to, and he was I gave him the people to call and all that, and roll forward up to 2016, last year. I drew a moose tag, and it was for the same zone that my friend was, and I was going to go back to the same guy's cabins. He rents cabins up there. Lo and behold, he drew his Iowa tag for 2016, last year. So I got up there to moose hunt, and actually I went to scout and to hunt, but I got up there, and he was going to Iowa to a farm I had hunted a couple times, and I was going moose hunting. So the two of us kind of needed each other to, get a little. He gave me some moose advice and tips, and I kind of got him hooked up with a nice farm in Iowa. And by the end of both of our seasons, he had his 150-inch buck, and I had my moose.
That's awesome.
So it, just meeting the right people sometimes is everything.
Right, and like you said, it's just about being open to it. Being willing to chat up people and being willing to, just engage. I'm guilty sometimes of being always in such a rush. I just want to get to somewhere. I just want to go this place, and I sometimes kick myself for not taking more time just to chat with people and kind of chill out a little bit. I think that's a mistake on my part, probably.
Yeah, I mean, if you just can get a chance, and you never know when that kind of moment's going to happen. You really just don't. So, yeah, maybe, I don't know how it, happens, but instead of, looking away or, just, I don't know this guy, I'm not going to talk to him or whatever, somehow if you keep yourself open, sometimes you just meet the best people, and that's happened to me, and, that's how I got permission to hunt in Iowa, met some really nice people. So, yeah, it's crazy how the world works sometimes.
Yeah, it definitely is. I want to go back a little bit to something you mentioned a little earlier. You were talking about how you're planning a Missouri hunt this year and how the first criteria you looked at to narrow down your list of spots was trying to find places that were bow only. Can you walk us through the rest of the criteria? Like, how do you continue to narrow down where you're going to end up focusing your efforts to start out? What other things are you looking for before you even get out there?
Yeah, well, before I got to making my list here, Missouri's a big state, so I had to, pick somewhere in Missouri to start. You got the northern part of the state. I mean, you've hunted Missouri, so.
I actually haven't.
Oh, you haven't hunted Missouri? I thought you had.
Hunted around it, but been just above the border a little ways. But
yeah, well, the first thing I started researching, and I've always wanted to go to Missouri, just I never have, and this is going to be the year. So the first thing was, well, where in Missouri am I going to go? A lot of people I talk to, there's a highway that runs east-west, Highway 70. A lot of people say the best, biggest deer are north of Highway 70, in the northern part or the northeastern part. They're trying to butt up to Iowa, I guess, and get in on that terrain. So I was thinking, well, do I want to be there? Do I want to be in the central? Do I want to be in the Ozarks? And I kind of hemmed and hawed, and eventually decided that, well, I'm guessing that everyone's going to try to get to the northern part of the state and the northeastern part, maybe in particular. So I'm thinking, well, maybe I'll just not do that. So I actually decided on probably a less, I guess it's a pretty big generalization to say all the big bucks are north of Highway 70, but I decided to, maybe I'll try the middle part of the state where I'm thinking there's going to be less people, less pressure on, maybe less non-resident pressure, probably still a lot of local pressure, but, so it was like a cutoff. I had to just decide. And then once you figure out, well, I wouldn't mind being here, and pick a spot. And most of my spots, I look at the state first. Look at all the big cities and just try to find an area that's the middle point of all the big cities. Like, stay as far away from the bigger cities as you can. Well, that's what I like to do. Which you don't always have to do, but that's my first starting point. And just, look away from the city. So I find an area, and then I look, well, what's the public land around there? Because really right now that's all I have. So you look and see where, like if I was here, how many spots can I get to within an hour? And Missouri's one of those states that just has land just about everywhere. A lot in the south, a lot in the southern end. So I didn't want to go way in the south. I figured the deer were getting smaller. But so once I figure out how many spots I can hit, then you just have to pull the trigger. Well, where am I going to stay? So that was the first thing I did, is I just picked a spot. And I'm not going alone. I'm going with some friends. So we all agreed. And I'm kind of a guy that picks the spots usually and gets things rolling. So we did that, and I just found found a spot. I found a couple bow-only spots. There's a couple big ones. So I picked an area that was near one of those big bow-only spots, and found a cabin. And that's how I like to do a lot of the hunts. I don't really like to camp. I mean, I like to camp, but I like to be fully focused on deer hunting, not, being up shivering all night or wet. Or, it's like, cabins are usually have been great. So that's what I usually look for, some kind of cabin.
Cool.
So, did that, got a place, got a cabin, and then that's how I started my list. I just listed out all the bow-only areas. That's my starting point. Right now, I'm still looking. I know where we're going to stay. I know what town we're going to be in. I have this list of bow-only areas, and now I'm just going to keep looking. And another thing I might do is for 2 or 3 days, I'll probably book somewhere else to stay, maybe in the northern part of the state. And since this is my first time in Missouri, we'll have our main hub, and then for maybe 2 or 3 nights, I might take a 3-hour ride somewhere and just to see. Well, is the north so much better than where I picked, or whatever,
Right.
This is my first year there.
Interesting.
And that's what I'll just do, and I'll just pick the place apart, and I'll look at it online, and I'll look, and I'll try to cover, the first year I'll try to cover as much area as I possibly can, at least get a peek at as much stuff as I can, and just go from there.
Yeah.
Hopefully I'm going to find something.
That's always the big question.
Yeah, it is, but hey, nothing will ever happen if you don't leave, if you don't do something, if you don't you gotta just decide to go and go.
Yeah.
I think that's, a lot of people probably get hung up with wanting to do this and not really knowing what to do, so they don't do it. But what's the worst that can happen? You just gotta really if you like to hunt, you just gotta go for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
You have to.
For someone who hears this and is like, wow, I would love to do something like that. Maybe they don't have as much time as you have, but they want to take some vacation time and get out to some different place and try to pull off a hunt like this. You've talked through a lot of the different things you're doing, but what would you say is like the most important thing? Like if you could leave someone with one piece of advice for doing some type of hunt like this, some type of trip like this, what would you want to leave that person with? What kind of advice?
Just what I was just saying is just don't think about it. Just go. Maybe, and let something happen. Let something good happen. I mean, the first step might be the biggest. It might be just getting out the door, leaving your house. Maybe, I don't know, maybe somebody's homesick or whatever, but you just got to leave and just, have fun. I go with friends of mine, and we could probably kill nothing, and we'd still have a lot of fun.
Right.
Guaranteed. Because, if I go with my friends out hunting, we have a blast. We cook. We all bring stuff that we've harvested, throughout the year. We always eat these big, we cook ourselves, and, we're eating like squid I caught out of the ocean, and,
wow,
and trout these guys, caught out of the lakes around here, or, moose stew, or any. So we have a good time, aside from the hunting, but, just like approach it as a fun thing, not, it shouldn't be a burden or pressure or anything like that. You should be, I think, excited to leave and see something new and keep a good attitude. And, if it doesn't pan out, then try something else. If you do it's easy to do research these days with the computers. You could find out just about anything.
Yeah.
You go on hunting forums, and there's tons of real nice people. I don't know if anyone's going to give you their public land honey hole, but you wouldn't believe the things you can find out.
Yeah.
So, I would just say you just gotta have fun.
Yeah. Speaking of things that people get hung up on, though, you mentioned some people just need to that first step's the hardest. Get out the door and try it. Another one of the things I think that keeps people from trying one of these things is the cost. Imagining a trip like this is really expensive. Is there anything that you've done to be able to make this a little bit more budget friendly? Anything that you would recommend to try to make this a more affordable type of trip for people?
Yeah, I guess the way I view it is you could do, if someone wants to get out there and do it, you could go with an outfitter. And, I don't know what the prices are like these days, but say the hunt is $3,000 or $4,000 or whatever. For that same money, you can hunt 2 or 3 states, or maybe even more, with lodging and everything. You could, or you can hunt 1 state cheap for half as much. So I kind of compared it to an outfitted hunt, but if you just pick the right states, there's a few states with 2 buck limits. So right there, instead of 1 deer, you can maybe get 2. If you, like I said, I go hunting with friends most of the time, and we'll get a cabin. So you could find a cabin for maybe, who knows, $100 a night. And if you have a couple friends with you, well, then it's, depending on how many people, 4 guys or 3 guys or 2, whatever you do, the cost just goes down. If you have some friends, and the driving too, like the big expenses on these hunts is the driving out there and gas and wherever you're going to stay. And then sometimes tags cost, non-resident tags are a little bit, but and if depends where you're willing to stay. If you want to camp, you can really probably go cheap.
Mm-hmm.
But compared to an outfitted hunt, I say you could do 3 or 4 times as much for the same amount of money if you really plan it right.
Right.
And I've done where I've hunted maybe 4, maybe even 5 states in 1 year, with 2 of them being right here in New York and Massachusetts, and then I've done up to 3 Midwest states in 1 trip.
Wow.
And I know not everyone can do that, but, and if you can't, or maybe someday you want to do that, just start by going to 1 state and spend as much time as you can. If you can't spend 3 weeks, and spend, I always say a little more than a week. It just seems like a week is just never enough.
It's tight. That's for sure.
It's never enough. You just need a little bit more.
Yeah.
And then if you get a tag like an Iowa tag, why would you want to waste that? It took you 4 years to get it, or 5 years, and you're going to hunt there for a week? That's crazy. You gotta,
milk it.
Put in the time. Put in the time in a good location, and I think you'll get onto something. I mean, bucks in the raw are different than maybe hunting buck beds, because with a buck bed, you might displace the buck you're hunting, but when it's rut season, basically all the bucks are almost displaced. They're either by another hunter or a doe or whatever. Their ranges just widen right out, and you're not gonna burn a spot because, well, maybe you burn the buck that lived right near there, but there's going to be 3 or 4 other bucks expanding their range into where you are. So you might get on an unknown buck.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you do during the rut to make you successful that we haven't talked about yet? Is there any other things you're looking for when choosing where to set up, or any other aggressive techniques? And we haven't talked about calling or decoying or cameras or anything like that. I mean, is there anything else you're doing to pull off these rut hunts?
No, I use a lot of regular techniques. I like to be, I go as scent free as I can, although it's not a regimen. It's just so, it's just so that whatever smell you do leave behind, it dissipates quickly. Just make it so you're not leaving a big footprint. You're just sneaking in. You're probably never going to beat a deer's nose while you're in a stand. If that thing gets downwind from you, there's really no cleanliness that's going to save you. But
it's tough.
Just normal, scent. Just try to be clean, and then I sometimes use a grunt call, sometimes use rattling antlers. I've had luck with both, but I've had, for every 100 times you blow a grunt call, one time might be, you might get some kind of response. And the same with rattling, you just got to do it at the right time. Otherwise, they only work when they work. When the deer, they only, well, you're not going to rattle anything up in September, probably. You might, I don't know, but
yeah,
there's more appropriate times to do things like that. Otherwise, I don't want the deer to know I'm there. I don't want to grunt to them. I don't want to rattle. I just want to be a leaf in a tree and, not clue them into where they are if you can help it. You just try to, when you're walking in, you don't want to touch everything that you're walking by. You just want to duck in there and just the little things like, why would you want to grab brush on your way by? You probably just left a big, who knows what you left.
Yeah.
Most of the stuff I do is pretty typical, except for the length of time, I would say.
Yeah.
And
that effort.
And maybe the amount of time I spend, looking for places online, I can't do it physically, so I spend who knows how many hours mulling things over and looking online and looking online again, and countless hours. And really, Wired to Hunt, that's a pretty good name. I kind of feel feel like I'm wired to hunt,
That's awesome.
No, really, I'm definitely wired to hunt. It's, I think about it. Probably not a day goes by without some thought of deer or hunting or, what I'm going to do for hunting.
I'm right there with you.
I live in the woods. Like, a lot of people aren't as lucky as I am. I can look out any window in my house and I'm looking at a dense forest. I live in a state forest, actually. So my land just plucks up to thousands of acres. So I literally live in the woods, and I've always been near the woods, and I've always lived in the woods. And it just helps to be tuned in to as much as you can be tuned into. Deer. Yeah, I don't know what it is, but I'm definitely feel like I'm wired to hunt.
I like to hear that. I like to hear that. The name resonates.
It does. It's just, I don't think no one else in my family's wired to hunt. I can sure tell you that.
Yeah.
So something happened to me. I don't know what, but
it definitely is. I think people, for a certain subset of people, we're just wired a certain way. There's something inside of us that this type of thing just connects with you, and you just can't stop thinking about it. You can't stop obsessing over these things. You can't stop thinking about, what if I try this, or what if I try that, or what are the deer doing right now, or what are they going to be doing next month? And
yeah, exactly.
There's some of us out here that just we can't ever stop scratching that itch. That's for sure.
No, it's crazy, and it's just something that's in some of us, I guess. It just can't. It's kind of almost as like unexplainable, but it's there.
Yeah.
And just the total desire to be there, And if you don't have that, you could probably learn everything there is to learn and still not be successful. You really, I guess, kind of have to be wired to hunt. Yeah.
Yep.
That is a good term, a good just overall description.
Yeah. Well, I think with this really great plug for Wired to Hunt, I'm going to say that's a good place to wrap it up too. So.
Yeah, all right. Well, that's great.
So, Eric,
wow.
This has been really fun. I've got one final question for you, and I just would like to hear about what you consider your favorite hunt, maybe, or maybe your most successful trip or hunt. Can you tell us a story of whatever that most memorable or best hunt would be from your past?
Oh, wow. Geez, there's too many to even. I really don't have. I don't know. I can't. I don't really think I have a best hunt. I couldn't really. I mean, there's hunts where I've got my biggest deer, but maybe they're not the best hunt. But there's just every one is awesome. I can remember every detail almost. I can remember the years, the dates. I can remember what happened. Some of the deer that got away.
All right, that was an unfair question. But, what about this? I'm gonna test your memory now, because you just told me you can remember every one of your hunts and the dates and all this kind of stuff. So how about this? Tell me about, if you can, how about your 2013 season? And can you tell me about one successful kill during the 2013 season on one of your trips? Can you tell me the details of one of those?
Yeah. 2013 wasn't the best year because my area got hit by EHD in 2012. So 2012, we watched a phenomenal area go to the greatest to the worst. in however many months that took. So 2013 was the first year of the comeback that I was wishing to go into the season, and just praying that I didn't see any more of that awful EHD that I saw in 2012. And I hunted, I was in Nebraska and South Dakota, and I wound up shooting a 9-pointer in Nebraska. It went one of my favorite stands that's like become a permanent fixture. It has been, but it was called the Hole in the Fence spot, and I wound up getting a nice chocolate horn, pretty nice 9-pointer, which I thought was pretty good due to the EHD that had just devastated the area. I didn't know if we were going to get anything or not. But, so yeah, that was, I got a 9-pointer in Nebraska, and I can remember it well.
What made that Hole in the Fence stand so good? Why has that been the place that you go back to over and over?
It's the place I was hunting that has these, I call them finger draws. It's just like prairie, but every steep ravine that can't be tilled or, grazed by the farmer. They make a steep ravine, and so there's a lot of area within those fingers that can't be traveled, but usually on the lips of those things, right before it goes down, they'll start to travel those edges. And this particular edge squeezed up with prairie on both sides of it, and the thing's like a finger going east-west. And then the further squeeze, there was a farmer's fence that kind of cut off half of the good area. So it just seemed like all these deer would just always head to this, like a hole where the fence ended. And that's what made that area so good, is it just pinched everything down.
Yeah.
So good that it was just one of those great spots.
Yeah.
And it also led up into one of the only cornfields in the area. So when the corn was there planted, it made a really good spot.
Yeah, that sounds like a dynamite rut spot. That's awesome.
Yeah, I killed a couple deer there. A friend of mine actually hunted there the day after. This was a couple years previous to 2013, but I had killed like a 140-inch 11-pointer, and my friend used the stand a few days later and killed a 170-something-inch deer.
Jeez.
Out of that spot. So,
wow,
great spot.
Sounds like it. Well, that's what it's all about during the rut. I mean, if there's anything I think to take away from this conversation, it's you find these key rut locations, you work your tail off and hunt as hard as you can for as long as you can during the rut. And if you do those two things and have a positive attitude, good things can happen, right?
That's right, man. Just stick it out, spend some time, have fun, meet as many people as you can, and you're bound to run into something good. You have to.
There you go. Well, Eric, that I think is some very solid, good advice for all of us. So I appreciate taking the time to do this and to chat, and thank you, Eric, and best of luck this coming season.
Hey, thanks a lot, man, and best of luck to you this coming season.
And that will bring this episode to an end. Just a couple quick things before we go, though. First, if you haven't yet left a rating or review for this podcast on iTunes, and if you have an extra 30 seconds, could you possibly go and do that for us? It is a quick thing to do, and your honest feedback is a huge help. Thank you in advance for doing that. Next, I also want to give a big thanks to our partners who help make this podcast possible. So big thanks to Sitka Gear, Yeti Coolers, Matthews Archery, Maven Optics, Whitetail Institute of North America, Carbon Express, and Huntera Maps. If you're enjoying this show and if you'd like to help keep it going, a really simple way to do that is to just send a message or a tweet or an email to some of these companies and let them know that you appreciate them supporting Wired to Hunt. Something as simple as that can actually make a big difference. And finally, thank you all for listening. I hope this one got you fired up for a rutcation of your own, and in the meantime, I hope you'll stay wired to hunt.
I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. You ever get that feeling the walls closing in, the concrete jungle suffocating you? You crave some wide open spaces, the chance to connect with nature, maybe in a spot all your own. Well, head over to land.com. They've got ranches, forests, mountains, streams, you name it. Search by acreage. You can search by location. You can search by the kind of hunting and fishing you're dreaming of. Land.com. It is where the adventure begins.